what inspired you to become this version of Michael?
That's a really deep, complicated question because I don't think it's one thing. I think it's multifaceted. Like we're multifaceted beings, spiritual beings living a human experience, right? So if we break all down all the pieces and we go into full embodiment and embrace it all, which is what I try to live in, is unconditional self-love. And spending the first, I'm 44 today and I'll be 45 in May. I spent the first 40 years of my life absolutely despising myself. Couldn't stand looking at myself. Showered in the dark, hated myself, couldn't stand myself. I was adopted at birth, abused in childhood from 2 to 14, started drinking at 9, doing hardcore drugs at 12, overdosed a few times, drowned twice, beat to death once, got a whole bunch of near death experiences, which created my spiritual belief structure beyond this physical experience. And then I married the wrong person because I was in a bad place. She was in a bad place. We stayed miserable together for a while. We had 3 kids, and then I couldn't take it anymore and I had to leave. So we were in Arkansas at the time, middle of nowhere, USA. And I went back to Florida to start working on myself and start working and healing myself. And in that period of time, we worked out a verbal divorce before I left. All got swept under the rug. She took my kids, met a guy online, and disappeared with my kids. 3 weeks later, I had no contact with my children almost for 20 total months. Very minimal contact, if any, for 20 months. I had no idea where they were until I hacked their credit card. Um, that was the real changing point. I've been sober 17 and a half years. So back in 2006, I got sober, but I never did any of the emotional work. So I was sober, but I wasn't that sober and free that people like to say. I had no freedom. I was miserable, more miserable sober. I hid behind porn, sex, womenizing, gambling, opening businesses. I hid behind everything, anything to avoid feeling. And then, so when I left my wife, ex-wife, and kids in 2018, she disappeared, whatever, all that stuff, right? They're sweep that under the rug for right now. In 20 December of 2019, when I was back in Florida, my father was still alive at the time. He took me out to lunch, and for the first time in my life, any one of my family members acknowledged the abuse I went through in my childhood. Because up until then, it was swept under the rug. It wasn't real. It never really happened. We sat down and had this big cry fest where he asked me what happened in childhood because it was my mother that abused me, not my father. He did the best he could. Both of my parents did the best they could. They had generational trauma and nobody knew how to heal those things back, in the 80s, 90s. So I don't blame anyone. Everyone does the best they can. I truly believe that. And when we had that conversation, it gave me a sense of peace that I never experienced in my life. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was the liar, manipulator, storyteller that I was told I was my whole childhood. And then at that point, what happened from there became in in I'm trying to think. So February of 2020, right before COVID, I got physical proof of evidence of the abuse against my children from my ex sister in law and ex mother in law. At that point, what I did was I got in the car and I drove to Arkansas with $3.46 to my name. No idea how I was going to do anything. I thought that it was all going to be okay. I just knew that I had to go do this. I had to go save my children. It's the only thing I knew. I packed for 8 days. I left with full tank of gas and $3.46. Borrowed from Peter, Paul, everyone I could borrow from to get to them to try and be there. My father ended up flying up and helping me to secure the lawyer. All these different things. We met the lawyer. We secured the lawyer, and then that was February 25th. And it took him 11 days to process the paperwork. So I was within an hour of my kids and couldn't go anywhere near them because the element of surprise was what was protecting the circumstance of me fighting for my children. So I was within an hour of my kids, knowing the abuse they were going through daily because it was daily abuse, and I couldn't do anything. I felt more helpless. More, my lawyer was telling me, "Oh, it's going to get filed. It's going to get filed." It still wasn't filed. It was 11 days of that torture with living on a $20 a day stipend because my father would send me $20 a day. I would buy a pack of cigarettes. I would eat the worst food in the world. It was the most disgusting thing ever. And then on March 6th, I got the emergency order for my kids. Keep in mind, I packed for 8 days, so I'm already there 11. So I get my kids. We go to a motel because that's all that there is in these little towns. We went to a motel. We stayed in that motel for another month, and then at that point, they gave us our next court date, which was 6 or 9 months away. At that point, because then COVID started. So it was right before COVID started that I got my kids, and then the whole world shut down. And now you're talking about a small town of between 5 and 10,000 people, very inadequate judicial system, and all these other things. So everything went to a grinding halt. I found an Airbnb and I said, you know what? Rather than paying every day for the hotel, I did a GoFundMe. I got a little bit of funds. I was able to secure an Airbnb for a couple months. And I just went month by month at the Airbnb from that point forward. The guy was religious. Thank God. He was really nice. He was very generous. He worked out a deal with me. So it worked out to less than half of what the hotel was costing. The motel was costing. Um, I was there. I ended up being there for 19 months fighting for my children. Now, during this period of time, at first, I was devastated. I'm like, I packed for 8 days. I have evidence of the abuse. Why is the system not supporting me? Why is the system against me? Because I heard things like "you're the outsider." Because that movie, My Cousin Vinny, is very factual about that type of mentality and area, and it was similar area to that. So you have this Italian guy coming from South Florida, an outsider fighting for his kids to take him away from their mother. So that was the outside perception of what I was doing, because there was 11 child services cases open. They never even took my kids out of the house. The one time they did take my kids out of the house, they told them that they were bringing them back. My kids were smart enough not to say a word. So child services never did anything. There were well visits to see if my kids were okay, but because of the nepotism in that area, they never even checked on my kids.